listeners, and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show Podcast Network. We are the Geek Show's dedicated podcast for movies by, starring, or about pop stars, and this is our 50th episode. Wow, can you believe? I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a columnist for The Geek Show and Horrified, the British horror website. I'm also a filmmaker and I write inlay booklets for Second Run DVD. I've been joined this week by
Gav Smith, host of the My Favorite Film podcast and also a writer on the side for the Geek Show website.
Indeed. I was recently on My Favorite Film, wasn't I? Just this week, just gone.
Were indeed. Just gone out this week, yeah.
Yeah. And I think I was very much in the advocate's role when it came to talking about David Lynch and Mulholland Drive.
Yes, definitely.
And I think it's not like you were anti-Lynch. It wasn't.
No, I'm not.
No.
I've said it before. I think David Lynch is a fantastic filmmaker. He knows his craft. Just I get really confused by every film that he ever makes, and I can't go back to them because I'm so confused the first time.
I think that this. I don't want to prejudge it, but this might be a bit of a role reversal because I think, like you, I am like you with Lynch. I'm not anti-Prince by any means, but I've never got into Prince. But this week we are doing Purple Rain, a film which the opening words are "Ladies and gentlemen, the revolution." Perhaps some thought it was a call to arms, but then it's hard to imagine anyone in 1984 not knowing who Prince's backing band were. They joined the singer on his previous album, 1999, whose worldwide success led Prince using his newfound clout in a way we at Pop Screen wholeheartedly approve of by refusing to renew his contract with his record label unless they allowed him to make a film, which is absolutely what you should do if you're a world-famous pop star.
Absolutely, yes. And he did it really well. In fact, he went through all his career, just not renewing contracts with record companies, but we'll maybe get into that.
Yes, yeah, that's very true. Yeah. I feel like I should explain a bit of my feelings on Prince, which were, I do remember his music growing up. I remember him I don't really remember him at his peak. I remember him in the sort of early to mid 90s. I looked at the Wikipedia page for Prince singles and was kind of astonished to realize that I could remember every single record that he put out in between about 1990 and 1996. So there is that. But it's one of those things. It's one of those things, like I said, about Bob Dylan when we did I'm Not There, which is that he has a fan base that is so meticulous that you're almost frightened to get into it. You feel like you can't listen to a couple of Prince albums and call yourself a fan. You need a much greater time commitment than that, I think.
Yeah, you're probably right, yes. I mean, you're talking about someone who's got, 42 studio albums?
Yeah.
It was 13 internet albums and then 9 compilations of his greatest hits. He's got a lot of stuff out there. And that's not including EPs and all the other stuff that he produced. So there's an awful lot of stuff in a very short career.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think I got this impression of Prince because, like I say, I remembered the songs and I remembered them being catchy. But I first realised what a bottomless pit the Prince discography can be when Q magazine, which I used to read when I was a teenager, had a feature where a reader would write in and say, I want to get into this genre or this artist.
Yeah.
And a celebrity would be picked to give them 5 albums to start with. And one time someone said, I want to get into Prince. What should I listen to? And the celebrity that they picked to explain it to them, have a guess who it was.
I don't think I can. I mean, it could be absolutely anyone. There's probably loads of celebrities out there that love Prince. No, go on, tell me.
It was, of course, Bill Oddie.
All right.
Yeah.
There you go. I wouldn't have thought that. I would never guess that. That would not have been one I'd guessed. But yeah.
But I can't remember 4 of them that he listed, but I remember distinctly the final one that he picked was The Truth, which is the acoustic set on the 3rd disc of the box set Crystal Ball.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, oh my God, if the starter kit involves the 3rd disc of a box set, if that's what I have to do to get the approval of Bill Oddie, then I'm not interested anymore.
Yeah, I don't think you need to go as deep as the 3rd disc on a box set, to be honest, to get good Prince. I think you could probably start with this album.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because the thing that absolutely knocked me sideways was, it's not like I was expecting the music to be bad. Of course, I've heard some of the songs on this. I've heard When Doves Cry, everyone has.
Yeah.
I've heard the Tiger track, everyone
Yeah.
has, liked them. But I was staggered at how the soundtrack is literally banger after banger after banger. It's incredible.
It is. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I realised that's probably not an epiphany for most people. That guy Prince, it turns out, had some good songs, but I was not expecting to love the soundtrack as much as I did at all.
Yeah, I must admit, Purple Rain is probably still one of my favourite albums. I mean, it's been, 1984, and I've probably had it on a rotation with other albums since that date. I go back to this album a lot. I think this is as you say, it's a banger of a soundtrack. It's got hit after hit on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have all of the songs that are in the film, which is something you noticed that maybe we'll get into.
Okay.
But the Prince songs that are on it are absolute classic Prince songs. Yeah.
Yes, I think the moment when it clicked was because the first one's "Let's Go Crazy," isn't it? It starts off with "Let's Go Crazy," which is a good song. I knew that song.
It's a great start.
The moment where it really struck me was the "Beautiful Ones," which I hadn't heard before, and I just thought, "Oh my God, how good is this? Absolutely astonishingly good."
Yeah. I mean, it has to be said. I mean, Prince was a musical genius, and no matter what distractors he may have now about how his life was outside of music and his relationships with people and women especially, the guy knew how to play instruments and how to make music. I mean, he could play every instrument there was. You could give him any instrument, he'd pick it up and he'd do it. I believe the only thing he couldn't play was saxophone, so he sat down in his basement for about 4 weeks and learned how to play the saxophone so that he could play saxophone himself, because that was the only thing he couldn't do.
I mean, if you're going to have like one instrument that you don't know how to play, the saxophone is a great choice. I think most records with saxophone could be improved by removing the saxophone.
Possibly, but he felt that he needed to learn how to play it, so he learned how to play it. And I'd say this album, it's just song after song. It's great. But it's not the album we're talking about, is it? It's the film we're going to talk about, which is a very different beast.
There's a slipperiness between them, isn't there? I think when you get to the end, and it's not a spoiler to say that it ends with 2 songs played back to back, and it suddenly struck me, oh, hang on, this is a concert movie. It might have a dramatic plot going in between the songs, but it is best approached as a kind of hybrid concert film, I think.
Yeah. Yes. See, you said something there that's kind of makes me think, really, because is there a plot? Because I think if you take out the hours worth of songs, what you're left with is a 50-minute mess. I mean, I am a Prince fan. I have been a Prince fan since 1982 when he released 1999, which I always find really difficult, but that's when he released it.
Yes, yeah.
And I think after I heard 1999, I went back and I found his back catalogue, which at that time was thankfully only 3 albums. So when Purple Rain came out, 1984, I was 12 going on 13. So when I found there was a film that I could watch with Prince in it, I thought, awesome. Except unfortunately, I am blessed or cursed with looking incredibly young. So I couldn't get into a 15 rated film.
Right.
12 going on 13. So I had to wait for VHS.
Yeah.
But was so disappointed by the film. I mean, I had the soundtrack and I listened to the soundtrack on a loop when I got it.
Yeah.
But the film's just it misses everything. I mean, it was created as a vehicle for four bands. There was Prince and the Revolution, The Time. They were at the time the Vanity Six, and then Des Dickerson. That was the four bands that basically this was created as a vehicle for.
Yeah.
The Vanity Six had lots of issues with Prince. He put them together, which left with Vanity, the lead singer, actually leaving, which is why we have now
Apollonia. Who?
Apollonia. Have fun saying that.
Did a bit of research here, and there is one of these sentences that only happens when you talk about Prince. No other artist gives you this. But Prince saw Apollonia in a TV series called Tales of the Gold Monkey, where her character was based on the only person that Prince then trusted to cut his lawn. And you think, yeah, when we did a movie starring Ed Sheeran, this sort of thing never happened, did it?
No, that's bizarre, isn't it? Yeah. So anyway, Apollonia took the role of Vanity in the Vanity Six, so they then became the Apollonia Six for this film, and went on to a massive success as a band. But it was basically that was it. It was a board for those four artists, but Prince very quickly, with his band, The Revolution, took control of the entire film, which is why, and I don't think it's if you look at their marketing and you look at the album, The Time aren't on the album.
Yeah.
Apollonia 6 isn't on the album. Poor Des Dickinson, who appears for, I think he's on screen for maybe a minute.
I was going to ask, who is that guy? Which one is he?
Modern is the song that he sings.
Right.
He's basically just on concert footage, and you see him sort of in the distance on the stage.
Yeah.
You don't really see him. And then they go backstage, and it's still playing. The song's playing. I think they play the entire song, but you don't really see him. Poor thing he's not even in as an actor. He's just on stage for that one song. So as a springboard for these new artists, which it was supposed to be, it really only brought Prince to the forefront.
It really did. I mean, for years afterwards, I would hear people, most notably Kevin Smith. I saw Kevin Smith's film Jane Silent Bob Strike Back when I was a teenager. That's a very interesting film to watch if you have no knowledge of Purple Rain, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it probably is.
Because there is that whole thread about Morris Day and the Time. I had no idea who they were. When I started researching them afterwards, like, for the longest time, I assumed they were a band who were made up for the purposes of this film.
No. They were a proper band. I mean, they reappeared in Graffiti Bridge, which is a semi-sequel to Purple Rain.
Right.
Prince always said it wasn't the sequel, but the fact he plays the kid in it, and Morris Day and the Time are back in it, it kind of implies
Hard
that
to
it
dispute.
was.
Yeah.
But yeah, the proper band. They made an awful lot of money as a band back when what's the music was classed as new wave funk, I believe. 80s American music.
I can sort of see the funk, but I feel like Americans just call everything new wave, don't they? I've heard Americans refer to like Duran Duran as new wave, and that is absolutely not what the term means in Britain.
No, not at all. Not at all. But that's what they called it. It was funk, but it was different. It had something else to it. It had a bit of electric to it and whatever else. So I don't know. That's what they called it. Yeah. But I mean, it's I can't remember what I was saying. I was saying that, if you take out the songs, you're left with this 50-minute story that it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't really.
It's
Go on.
interesting. Maybe it's because it made so much money, because it did. It made an astonishing amount of money when it was out, to like well over 10 times its budget.
Yeah.
But there's never been a question mark over whether Purple Rain is a movie. And when you look at a lot of these 1980s pop vehicles, that is a question. There are people who will look at something like, I mean, films we've done on this show, Jerusalem with the Style Council, or It Couldn't Happen Here with the Pet Shop Boys. Or what was that one that, there was one that Duran Duran did, I remember. Maybe I'm just thinking of them.
Arena.
Arena, that was it, yes. Later spun off into a successful BBC art strand. People would watch those and say, well, it's not really a film, is it? It's like a music video that's turned into feature length. And I think Purple Rain has a bit more plot than It Couldn't Happen Here.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. Yes, I think it probably has. It's got a more grit to it.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole story of his abusive father and the relationship with his mother. But it's glossed over. I think there's very interesting sort of ways of looking at the film, and the mirroring of the kid played by Prince and his relationship with Apollonia and his dad's relationship with his mum. They are absolutely mirrored.
Yeah.
There's a control there, but is that the story? You know, I would question. Actually, if you were to look at this film, who would you say was the main protagonist? Who's the film about?
It seemed unquestionable to me that Prince was the protagonist, but then I went into this with my knowledge of it was like a few songs I'd heard, and that poster with Prince on a motorcycle against a sunset, and all the text that is on the poster is just Prince, Purple Rain. So you look at that and you think this is an absolutely classical pop star vehicle. It can't be anything but. As you say, it is a bit more complex than that. But I don't think
it is.
I don't think I ever doubted that the kid was the main character.
You see, because if you think about the start of it, where we have "Let's Go Crazy," which is a brilliant song to start any film with. You know, apart from the introduction of, you know, "Ladies and Gentlemen of the Revolution," it then starts with his praise speech. You know, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Monologue, which is a wonderful monologue at the start of any song. But very quickly within that, we are introduced to all of the other characters. Notably, God, I'm going to have problems saying her name all night. Apollonia. In the taxi, where she jumps the fare, very quickly finds somewhere to live, and to me, it was setting her up as being a kind of main character, because they gave her very quickly a lot of backstory. And I kind of thought, certainly the first time I saw it, actually, it's not going to be about Prince. It's going to be Prince helping someone. And this girl's come to the big city to make a fame and fortune, to become a star, and maybe Prince is going to help out. And I thought, when the first time I saw it, that's what it's about. And to a certain extent, it is about that, but that all goes somewhere pear-shaped in the middle of it, because at the end of the day, they want to get in as many Prince songs as is physically possible.
Well, that's it, isn't it? I see what you're saying, and I think if somebody put the script to Purple Rain down in front of you and said, you know, doctor that, you know, make it better from a story perspective, probably would be a good idea to center it around Apollonia. But it's not that, and it can't be that, because, you know, Prince is in it. But I never got the sense that Prince was an intruder in someone else's story. It's like that. That montage reminded me a bit of a sort of cruder version of. Have you ever seen Magnolia?
Yes.
You know, the big musical montage. At the start of Magnolia to One by Amy Mann, where it introduced Seven. I thought it's a bit like that. You know, we are being introduced to our supporting cast here,
Yeah,
but I never
yeah.
got the sense that, I don't know, I just felt like if we were being introduced to someone who has a dream of becoming a singer and that was going to be her story, it's
Yeah.
a bit weird to do it over this spectacular show by someone completely different.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I don't know. I think it would have been a better film for it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a wonderful story around Morris Day and the Time in there as well. I can't quite understand why Morris Day would want to hate Prince quite as much as he obviously does, and why he wants to be this rival to him, because their music's very different. And I don't think the way Prince is with his music, there's no way Morris Day in the Time could ever have competed with him. But he does want to get him off the bill and get his own female band in there.
It's quite an interesting thing, that, because if this was a film full of fictional music artists, or even real artists playing fictional artists, you know, rather than using their own names, the simplest thing to do to make this story strand work would be to make the kids' rivals completely terrible. You know, you do what they do in School of Rock, where, you know, that bit in School of Rock where they go to the Battle of the Bands and Dewey's old band are like singing this rock ballad called Heal Me, I'm Heartsick. And as soon as they do that, you just want them to eat shit. You hate them so much. But they can't do that, of course, because Morris Day and the Time are a real band who this film is sort of trying to promote.
Sort of, yes. Yes. And I mean, the two songs they sing on it, because it's only two, Jungle Love was a big hit. Not maybe in this country, but certainly was in the States.
Yeah.
And The Bird, pretty sure, was even bigger. And they're great songs. If you listen to them, they're actually fantastic songs. And Morris Day, certainly from a personality point of view, has more personality to him than Prince. I think I would have preferred if he'd been the protagonist and the main character, because he's actually got an awful lot going for him.
Well, let's talk about how these people cope as actors, because I mean, Prince is kind of minimal, and I think he's obviously not a great actor, but you can get a long way on being quite mysterious and compelling.
Yeah.
Some of the others, shocking, I think, really bad.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it's a vehicle for these artists, and rather than, as you say, get actors to play artists in a made-up band, they've got real bands and gone, right, act. I think there's only three ways you can do it. You can either get real actors that can sing a little bit to play the band, and they'll not be brilliant, but it'll work.
Yeah.
Or you can get real bands to play, and they'll be bad at acting. Or you can go the other way, where you get brilliant actors who can't sing and dub them with fantastic singers. They've kind of gone for the second of those and got real bands who really can't act. I mean, the Poor Revolution are so out of their depth in acting whenever they're backstage. Wendy and Lisa are kind of all right.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought they kept their heads a bit above the prevailing standard.
Yeah. The other two guys just look like they don't want to be there, and they will just say the lines, and hopefully people will just think we look good.
Yeah.
It's quite terrible, really. But I mean, they try and do things with Jerome and Morris Day, which I think are the best scenes are Jerome and Morris Day. There's the wonderful bit about the password's what.
Yes.
Which is possibly the best acted scene in the entire film.
Yeah.
Other than the songs, it's probably the best scene. And it's because there's a lovely...
There's a kind of Danny Kaye quality to it, isn't there?
Yeah. And there's a definite relationship between Jerome and Morris that there definitely isn't between Prince and any of the Revolution or even between Prince and Apollonia, to be honest.
Morris also gets my favourite line of the film, which is his chat-up line, "In my bedroom, I have a brass waterbed," which is amazing. You could drop that straight into Licorice Pizza and people would be talking about what a genius line that was. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, he just reactions he has to things that happen, the looks that he gives the camera are brilliant. He's got a bit of a comedian in him, obviously. And he shows it very well. He's got a great stage presence. I mean, I have seen him when Prince did the Graffiti Bridge tour, the time we're with him. So I did see the time live, and definitely the Times set that they did before Prince came on was actually better than Prince's, to be honest.
Yeah.
Prince let the British public down. He did a 40-minute set.
Oh man.
And when you've been waiting all day in Manchester and probably in the ground for 2 or 3 hours, the Time came out and did a good half an hour, which was fine because there was a support act. And then Prince comes on and does 40 minutes, and then he's gone. It's like, right, okay.
Yeah, that's unacceptable.
But reminded me a lot of this film, you know, halfway through the end of a song, he's off, and he's off in the backstage already, and they're finishing off the set on the stage without him. I don't know. He said that this isn't a biographical film. I think there's an awful lot of Prince in the kid.
I mean, I can imagine, but I think you would struggle to see Purple Rain as a realistic portrait of Prince's struggle to make it in the music industry. Because one thing that, and this sounds like a criticism, but I don't care really, it's part of the fantasy of the whole thing, but can you imagine the kid fitting into any kind of local music scene anywhere in the world?
No, I can't.
Because I was like, when he comes on and he's starting Let's Go Crazy, my first thought was, this is the story. The kid is a superstar. That must be what it is. Because, you know, part of it's just the quality of the song. You cannot play a song like that and have people not believe you were a superstar.
No.
But he's not, isn't he? He's just like one of a series of acts who play a medium-sized bar in downtown Minneapolis. And there's like a bit where he's doing Computer Blue and he's like shirtless and he's got baby oil all over him. Right? I've been to a lot of pub gigs. I've been to a lot of open mic nights. And let me tell you, listeners, they are not normally that exciting.
No. I've never seen a small indie band who have got no fans in a small club play anything like that. I mean, he's climbing on the stage, he's gyrating his body all over the place, he's stage diving by the end and being pushed back on the stage and just cool with the whole thing. It's not a normal performance. It's a superstar performance, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
And I guess by that point, he was a superstar. So that was in him.
You know, I think we did Slade in Flame recently on this show, and that is a very good example of taking a band who then were like arguably the biggest band in the country and making them into a struggling band on the way up and having it work. But you can just about do that with Slade, but you cannot do that with Prince at all, and that's fine. You know, I don't mind.
The only way you could do it would be show more of his home life. To not start with him on stage, to start with him at home and show where he's come from. Not let him wear his outfits that he would wear with these massive purple coat and these wonderful white shirts and whatever else, and put him in something else and have someone build him to that.
Yeah.
But I guess there's an element to the film that I guess the whole point of the film is that you need someone else to help you in this industry. I think that's sort of Prince's arc in it, because I think although I said there's not much story, it's probably because there's too much story in too little a time. Because Prince's arc is about him saying he can do everything himself, which he did. You know, his first 3 albums, he really recorded all himself. He played every single instrument on it, whatever else. 1999, he gets the Revolution involved because he's got to go on tour. Yeah, and that's the only reason why he had a band. Because you can't go out on tour and play every instrument yourself. It's just not physically possible. So he gets a band. And his arc in this is basically saying, by the end of it, he gives credit to the rest of the band, says this is a song that was made by whoever. I think it was Wendy Lisa's song that he says it is.
It is, yeah, and I want to come back to that because I think that's interesting. But yeah, keep going.
Yeah. So that's his arc, is I've got to have someone to help me in this industry. I can't be a star without other people. And that's his whole story. At the same time, there's Apollonia's story, which is she wants to be an artist, wants to fall in love and whatever else. She does that really badly because falling for Prince was the wrong thing to do because he's a shit, is the best way to describe him. He is not a good boyfriend in any way, shape, or form at any point during this film. But she gets to be in a band, she gets to play a song, she gets to be famous, arguably. She gets to be happy at the end. Not really sure. And then there's Morris Day's story, which kind of just starts and finishes and doesn't really end.
Yeah,
it's just there in the background, and that's what I mean. There's no real story. There's three stories that don't go anywhere. But I think, as I was saying, if you'd taken bits of those stories and made them something else, just taking Prince's arc and saying, right, he's a boy from nowhere. Look at his background. Look what he's got. And then he becomes the big star at the end. And you could even end it with "Let's Go Crazy" instead. And it would be a better kind of story. I'd say I could rewrite it very, very easily.
It's strange, isn't it? Because as we were saying, part of the uneasiness about developing these story arcs is because these are real people. And so you can't have Morris Day in the time being all-out villains because the film wants people to buy their records. You can't have Apollonia go commercial and make absolutely dogshit music that betrays her vision because the film wants you to buy that record. The nettle that it grasps, though, is the one, like, I think if this was done now, those story strands would be properly developed and you'd see a version of the Apollonia story arc which is very similar to those oft debated bits in the recent version of A Star Is Born, where Lady Gaga's character ends up being like manufactured and playing sort of chirpy disco pop, and people are saying, are we meant to see that as bad, given that that's basically her day job? There's but credit to it for going there. But the bit that I would expect the artists involved to be most nervous about is the bit that it absolutely dives into, which is, as you say, that it portrays Prince's character as a really unrepentant bastard.
Yeah, absolutely. From the moment he meets Apollonia through to the very end, even that very end scene, you think, actually, is he that nice? The whole cleanse yourself and lake, whatever it was. And making her undress in front of him. And only when she jumps in the water going, oh, no, that's not the right lake. It was he knew exactly what she was going to do, but he let her do it anyway. And it's just, and the whole pulling away on the bike before she can get onto it and things. Like, once is funny, by the fifth time, it's not funny anymore. You've now got to stop and let her get on.
And it doesn't want you to see it as funny, doesn't it? Because as you mentioned at the start, this is explicitly paralleled with Clarence Williams playing his dad. And his dad is a very nasty, abusive guy.
I mean, his dad is seen as very, very controlling. I think he says to at one point, you stay in the house, you don't go anywhere. You stay here, you clean, you make my food. That's it. I think he calls her a sinner as well. Can't quite remember, but there's definitely a religious subtext there somewhere, which I think comes from Prince's background as well.
I was going to say, because one of the things I don't really know much about, not being a real fan, is that Prince obviously has this very complex relationship with religion, that this has, Let's Go Crazy is full of Christian references. I Would Die For You is full of Christian references. And then there's also Darling Nikki, which if there were any Christian references in there, I must have missed them. So he occupies this very strange space in the intersection of religion and American pop culture, and I don't really know how to parse that.
You see, Prince has got a strange relationship with absolutely everything in the world, and I
Right,
think
fair enough.
that's part of the thing. Through his career, he cited himself as being pretty much every religion there was at some point in time. I
Yeah,
think at the time of his death, he was Jehovah's Witness.
he was. Yeah.
But he also cited himself as being every gender possible,
Mm,
which is one of the reasons why his symbol was a mixture of the male and female symbol when he lost his name because it was owned by the record company
yeah.
and he had to turn himself into a symbol for 2 or 3 albums. It's that was to do with the fact that he didn't see himself as male or female.
Mm,
He was in that sort of ballpark that we're now talking about now, where people don't see themselves being female. Before anyone even thought you could be non-binary or anything like
yes.
that.
Yeah.
But having said that, he always had relationships with women, as
Mm.
far as certainly people outside were concerned. So I don't know.
And that's
But yeah,
sort of that's part of the Prince appeal at this point, isn't it? Because
yeah,
this is very early on in
oh
the
yeah,
AIDS crisis. It's a
yeah,
very homophobic time, the early 80s.
yeah,
There's no way that you could have had an out gay singer
no, no,
uh, reach the kind of level of celebrity that he
yeah.
had. Um, but with Prince, it doesn't feel like a cop out, doesn't it? I suppose when you say it out loud, you realize, well, it sounds an awful lot like he's dancing around it and sort of acting a bit
Oh yeah.
camp, but then saying, oh, no,
Well,
I'm a ladies' man, really. But no, it's not like that, is it?
no, no. I mean, if you go back to Controversy, which was what 2 albums before,
Mm,
in that he was, am I black or white? Am I straight or gay?
yeah,
These were lines from the song, so he was already talking about that type of stuff at the late 70s
yeah,
when he was first coming up as an artist and making his own music. So it's not something he'd ever hidden. He wanted people to question what he was. And he didn't want people to have a clear idea of what he was. And that's why he reinvented himself so many times. He
mm,
probably reinvented himself more times than Bowie did. And
mm.
Bowie pretty much reinvented himself every single album. But when you've done 42 albums and you
Yes.
reinvent yourself for every album, that's a hell of a lot of times. So yeah, the whole religion thing is something that he messed with an awful lot.
And
Yeah,
it started to come to a head towards the end of the 80s when, let me see if I've got this straight. He had an album that he was going to make as his female alter ego Camille, and he got cold feet and scrapped it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then he released Love Sexy, which,
yeah.
as you would expect from an album called Love Sexy, he said was a gospel record.
Yes, obviously.
Obvious as it, yeah. I think most gospel albums have like pictures of the singer naked inside a giant flower on the sleeve. That's how they're marketed.
Absolutely. I've many gospel albums, and every single one is like that. The whole collection. Yeah. No, I mean,
This is
he,
one of the things that I think actually is maybe a reason why Prince has such an obsessive fan base, is that there is a
yeah,
great degree of fun to be had chasing down those lost albums and things that never get released. Because I'm a Beach Boys fan. They
yeah,
basically started that tradition
yeah,
of the secret masterpiece that you can only get on bootleg. So I
yeah,
do get that appeal.
yeah. Well, I mean, now that he's died, his estate, there's so much stuff that his family have now picked up from his estate. You
Mm,
know, they've re-released Sign of the Times and 1999 on 4 CD collector's editions.
mm,
And those extra 3 CDs aren't like you'd expect, early demos of the songs. They're all completely new songs that he
yeah.
recorded at the same time as the main album, but he didn't feel they were worthy enough to go on the album.
And how
So,
do you feel about that? Because I know a few Prince fans who are kind of like, it's nice being able to hear this stuff, but when you think about how carefully he controlled his image during life, it's like,
yeah. Well, it is. It's that thing of he obviously I think I said at the start, I think he's musical genius, or he was a musical
Mm.
genius. But he knew what was good and what was bad.
Yeah.
And when he released an album, generally, as with this, it was an album full of bangers. And
Mm.
every song you wanted to listen to. So he picked those songs they didn't want to put on because, well, they just weren't good enough. And I
Yeah.
listened to all 4 discs of The Sign of the Times, which took a long time to get through, to be honest. But the extra 3 discs, they were mediocre album tracks.
Yeah.
The things that you don't expect from Prince. Prince's mediocre album tracks still could be a single and outsell most people's best works.
Yeah.
So when you get 3 albums worth of stuff that's not quite like that, it's like, well, actually, I don't want to hear that anymore.
Yeah.
I honestly think his estate should just be left now, and just what's out there is what's out there. That's what he thought was good enough to release. Leave the rest of it. I think they've released 7 albums now posthumously. So his estate have found 7 albums worth of stuff that he hadn't bothered releasing. If they keep doing that every year, releasing another album, which I guess they can, because they reckon the vault's got about 5,000 songs in it that have never been released.
Yeah.
It won't take them. It'll take them a long time to get through 5,000 songs with only 15 songs per album or whatever. So I don't know. I think we should leave it.
It's one of those things, isn't it, where I don't know, maybe it's a coincidence, but I do think this sort of thing is very racialized as well, where when a legendary white artist dies young, those reissues are very carefully pored over and staggered, and it's ensured that the market isn't glutted. And when it's a black artist, it's like, oh, we've got a dictaphone clip of Tupac like mumbling a couplet that he was going to record properly later. Let's bung it on a single and get the cheeky girls to guest on it. That should be a hit.
Although you say that, and how many songs has George Michael managed to release since dying?
I don't know, actually, because I'm not that...
It's about 4 or 5.
Is it?
And some of them are actually, they've literally taken words from songs that were released whilst he was alive and reworked them into other songs. They've almost sampled him saying the word "the" or the word "love" and got them together to make another song.
Yeah.
And some of them were part finished works that they reckon they've then done that to make them full finished works. But, it happens all the time. Someone dies and they've got an estate and they've got stuff left over. So why not?
It is one of those things.
The Beatles, John Lennon was, the release. I can't remember which song it was now.
Free as a Bird, wasn't
That's it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's something that they do because they can.
But Free as a Bird came out in the 90s. Like they took 25 years to start scraping the barrel like that. Whereas, I say, when it's Prince, when it's Tupac, when it's anyone like that, it is, look, let's start whoring this catalogue out immediately. Yeah. And it reminds me, I'm sure I've said this when we did the episode about Amy, but one of the great heroic acts in pop music for me is that when Amy Winehouse died, Raphael Sadiq, who was a producer on, like, I would say about half of the released music went through him. He burnt all the master tapes he had of unreleased music because he said, look, she was a ridiculous perfectionist. She would have hated this going out when she was alive, and I really don't want it to go out when she was dead.
Yeah, and I think Prince, from the same point of view, that's why all his master tapes, he owned all of his master tapes.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the whole thing with Warner Brothers was, when he became a slave and he wrote slave
on his face. Yeah. The most efficient form of protest.
Absolutely, yes. It worked so well. That was all because he believed that all artists should be in charge of their own masters. So if you leave a record company, your master tape should go with you because it's your work. It's you that's put the time and effort into it. So you take that stuff. And he did pave the way for other artists to be able to do that. And he did get control of all his own masters. So all of his masters are down in the basements of Paisley Park.
Yeah.
And now his family have got control of those. They're the ones doing it. He would never have done it. And you do think, if he'd been given the time, would he have destroyed those masters himself to go, actually, too old now. I'm not doing anymore. I'll get rid of them. But he never got a chance to because, well,
Maybe he would have. Yeah.
circumstances.
I mean, like we were saying earlier, there were whole albums which he announced and promoted and was starting to get ready. And it's like, what's that whole thing with the Black Album? Was it called?
The
Was that-
legendary Black Album.
Yeah.
Well, that one was an album he made pre 1999, so the album 99 rather than the year.
Yeah. So both really is if we're
but it was released. He released it. He wanted it released because he decided that it was an album that he'd publicized. He'd made a big deal out of at the time, and it was going to be released, and then was never released. So he forced the release of it later on when he was big enough to do so. I mean, it's actually quite a good album.
Yeah.
It was promoted as being, hey, look, this is something that you've never heard before. It's by Prince. Let's have a look at it. It's not his best album.
Yeah.
But it was certainly released as the legendary Black Album rather than just the Black Album, which is what it would have been if it had been released way back when it was originally released or supposed to be released. Yeah.
There is a bad history of calling your album the Black Album. It is possibly cursed because like
Could be.
The KLF were working on something called the Black Album when they split up in exceptionally weird circumstances, and they like removed all of their records from circulation. And of course, there's the Black Album by Metallica, which was cursed in that it was an album by Metallica. Rumor has it that if you bought it, you had to listen to Metallica.
Oh, imagine that. Yeah, that's some curse, isn't it?
Indian burial ground shit there, yes. But yeah,
I can't think what we're up to now.
To drag this slightly back round to the movie.
To the film instead of talking about Prince, yeah.
I enjoyed talking about Prince there. I think watching this film, whatever you say about it as a film, the music has made me realise that I could be a Prince fan.
Yeah. I think, especially this film, I think if you asked anyone to name, 10 songs by Prince, at least 4 of them would be on this film.
Yeah.
Because I think most people go, well, When Doves Cry, Purple Rain, Let's Go Crazy, and I Would Die for You. Straight off. There'd be no problem. Now, that's 4 that are on this film. So when you consider that the back catalogue he's got, that you'd probably pick those, then you'd probably get 1999 would come out somewhere along the line. Diamonds and Pearls might come out, Bat Dance, obviously.
Yes.
But 4 of his best songs are on this album. In this film. And he does a fantastic live performance of every one of those songs as part of the film.
Well, there was one other song, as you say, those songs are incredibly famous, and I was familiar with them before I watched the film. There's one other that I can't remember if I'd heard it, but I knew it by reputation because it has this extraordinary place in musical history. If you've ever wondered, listeners, why there are those patronizing little black and white stickers on the front of your records warning you that there may be swears in this, it's basically because of Darling Nikki, isn't it?
Yes. What was it? I first met Nikki masturbating to a magazine. Was that
in
the
a
first
hotel
line?
lobby, which sounds to me like this hotel has very poor standards. Like there's no
very,
yeah. And it was Tipper Gore, Al Gore's ex-wife, who heard her kid playing that and hit the roof and decided, not as most parents would do, to ground them and confiscate their Prince albums for a week or whatever, but to launch the Parents Resource Music Council and to have these hilariously time-wasting Senate sessions where like Frank Zappa and Alice Cooper were called in to explain why the dead Kennedys were called into to explain why they'd given a poster of a H.R. Giger print called Penis Landscape away with one of their albums. A really dumb time in musical history, I thought.
It was.
Yeah.
And I mean, then through the whole of the rest of the 90s, we had, as you say, those black and white things with parental advisory.
Yeah.
explicit lyrics stuck over everything, and every single Prince album, obviously.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And you couldn't peel them off either. They were there and they were stuck.
Mm.
But yeah, man, a lot of songs. I mean, even Computer Blue starts with Wendy and Lisa talking about it's the bathwater warm enough.
Yes.
And Prince has always had a thing about bathing with people. In a lot of his songs, he talks about getting in the bath and whatever else. So it's a recurring theme. But there's something to it that's more than just the having a bath. You know,
Yes.
the girls getting in the bath together. I'm sure they're not just washing, but
yeah, it's the old joke about the nun looking for the soap, isn't it? Yes.
Absolutely. But they're the only two that are like that. But there's a lot, even in the rest of the songs in it. There's a lot of. He's always very sexually explicit in all the songs. Even Let's Go Crazy, you know, pick up the phone, drop the floor, and is all I heard. I can't sing it because I'm not going to try. But there's a definite thing in there that there's something going on at the other side of the phone that we are unaware of.
Yeah.
And he knows exactly what's going on. And it's in every single song to a certain extent. Yeah.
Yeah. Something that you mentioned earlier that I was kind of curious about, where you said that you've tried to get in to see this at the cinema, but your youthful charms made it impossible for you to get past the door.
That's why I have a beard now, just so I look older.
Yes, if you shaved it off, people would still be patting you on the head and giving you a Haribo. Yes.
Yeah.
What was this one of those films that kids would talk about in the playground? Because it feels like that. It has that feel where it is kind of your gateway to grown-up movies. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, certainly. I think I actually first saw it because Channel 4 got a hold of it very quickly. Because in the 80s, they could get films like this very quickly. And I think I probably saw it late night Channel 4 rather than on VHS. And then it was definitely something we talked about. In the playground, because everyone was talking about, you know, Apollonia getting in the lake at the start, because, you know, there was breasts on screen, you know. And then the weird foreplay scene between Prince and Apollonia later on, which is completely pointless from point of view of the film, because there's so many other ways you could play that scene. You know, they spent the night together. Why shows this weird, I don't know, dancey foreplay thing that they do, and then just cut to the next day? You know, they never show you anything more than that. But certainly those scenes were ones that, hey, did you remember that bit when that happened? But yeah, it was talked about. But I think I tried to go and see it at the cinema, and it was very much a case of it's 15 and you just, you know, getting in.
Yeah.
And that was fair enough. I got turned away and went to see something else. Can't remember what was on, but I'll have seen something mundane and boring instead. That was probably a better film, actually, worthwhile spending my money on.
Well, I don't know, man. 80s multiplexes. I'm not one of those guys who venerates 80s Hollywood, so it was probably terrible.
Well, to be honest, 80s multiplexes didn't exist. Certainly where I grew up, there was three screens. Our local cinema had 3 screens, so if Purple Rain was playing one place, there was only 2 other movies that were going to be on. So who knows?
No, that's a fair point. Yes. Yeah, I remember Middlesbrough got our first multiplex sometime in the early 90s. So yeah.
Probably about right. We didn't have cinemas the same way back then. There were big places. They had curtains that opened and closed. To mention that.
Projectionists, everything.
I know.
Yeah.
Someone behind you could shout at if the film wasn't going well. It was great.
Yes. So yeah, I think it's interesting that we've sort of met in the middle on this, that you watched this as like a huge Prince fan and thought, the music's good, but the film isn't really holding up. And I watched it as someone who did not expect anything particularly from a Prince musical and thought, I don't care about the film, but this soundtrack's fucking incredible. And we've sort of, like I say, we've sort of met in the middle on that, I think. Yeah.
I mean, poor Prince, you know, he, as I said earlier, twice, a couple of times, I think, he was a musical genius, but he was never an actor. And he tried several times beneath Cherry Moon.
Yes,
and
the
Graffiti
first
Bridge.
screen credit of Kristen
Yeah.
Scott Thomas.
Yeah, he never really was an actor. He should have stuck to music all the way through. Musically, he's great. And this film, I think I have now seen it twice.
Yeah.
So to say I am a big Prince fan, to say that I've seen what is supposedly his biggest film twice. I saw it once when it came out, or once when it got on the Channel 4, effectively. And then for this, I watched it a second time.
Yeah.
And the reason I've ever gone back to it is because I'd rather just listen to the soundtrack.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
I can get everything I want from this film by just putting on the album and listening to it. Because everything I want from it is on the album.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense. The sort of one interesting bit that I picked up earlier that I wanted to mention is that when he plays his final set, he does credit Wendy and Lisa for the year. And that is such an interesting moment for me because he has been so dismissive of every woman around him for the whole movie. And I know that some people criticize the film for this, and I'm sure if it was made nowadays, it would be treated very differently. But I think that is a moment of, that's an arc moment, isn't it? That's a moment of awareness that
it is,
his redemption comes from actually valuing the input of the women he works with.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the whole thing I was saying, that the prince or the kid's story is about him realizing that he needs other people to help him make music.
Yeah.
And that is him saying that in not too many words. It's bizarre that he picks that song as being the one that Wendy and Lisa wrote.
Which one was it again?
It's Purple Rain.
Oh, it is Purple Rain.
Yeah,
I thought I misremembered that because I thought there's no way that
Yeah, so he dedicates it to his father first off, which is fair enough. And then he says it's written by Wendy and Lisa. And then you listen to it and think, why would they write that song that he could then dedicate to his father and actually work quite well? You know, the opening lines of "It never meant to cause you any trouble, never cause you any pain." It makes sense that he would be singing that to his father.
Yeah.
So why would Wendy and Lisa have written those words?
But it's interesting.
So perfectly there.
It's another area in which this film is kind of interestingly a bit off the mark in working as a promotional tool, because you would think that there would be some like undistinguished funk workouts that he could credit to the backing band, and then when it comes to the crowning moment, the thing that the film is named after, that's his personal statement. Dramatically, that should be how it works.
Yeah, and even if by dedicating to his father, he'd been able to go back, because obviously as part of the film, he finds all his father's music after his father fails to commit suicide, but he's no longer in the house.
Yeah,
he finds all the music his father's obviously written down. His father must have been a great musician at some point, and they do kind of mention it briefly about the kid being just like his dad. Even if Purple Rain had been a reworking of that piano piece that he starts playing, and he could then go that dedicated to his father, this is based on his piano piece, and then you'd go into Purple Rain. And one of the other songs be Wendy and Lisa's, you know. I don't know which one, because I'm pretty sure, did they finish with?
It finishes
Purple
with "I
Rain.
Would Die for You," doesn't it?
Well, it's Purple Rain, then "Baby I'm a Star."
Yeah.
And then "I Would Die for You." Now, "I Would Die for You" is a line that his father says to his mother after hitting her, and he walks out the door. So obviously there's a connection there. "Baby I'm a Star," I could see being a song by somebody else.
Of course, yeah, it's less personal. Yeah.
But the other two just don't work as being the songs that the rest of the band have helped him write.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It is very weird. I feel like I can only side with one of our preeminent film critics, FBI agent Fox Mulder, when he said that Purple Rain is a great album and a deeply flawed film.
Yeah, I can go with that. And I have to ask you about the guitar at the end.
Yeah.
The very end, does that guitar come on the audience? Is that the point of that?
I don't. Oh, yeah, maybe.
He strokes it and something shoots out of it, and then he turns to the camera and the credits roll. And it's just a bizarre scene.
Yes. Yeah, that is very strange.
I don't know. I'm putting that out there for everybody else in the world to decide.
But yes, I think that covers it. What do you say?
I think so.
Yeah.
I would say if you want to become a Prince fan, you want to get into some Prince's music,
Mm.
Purple Rain's a good place to start. And then I'd move to Sign of the Times.
Yes. Yeah, I was
Sign of the
curious
Times
about
is-
Sign of the Times.
It's a big album, but it's certainly got some fantastic works on it again. It's really worthwhile listening to. And then Around the World in a Day. And after that, you can go with any of the songs because you've got the best 3 albums are there.
Oh, it's interesting. I don't hear people talk that much about Around the World in a Day.
Well, Raspberry Beret is on
Is
Around the World
that
in a Day.
right?
So-
Well, I love Raspberry Beret. It's one
You're
of the
at
most joyous things I've ever heard. Yeah.
Yeah, you're at that point in his career. So there's some of his best songs around that area. You know, when you
Yeah.
get into the sort of mid 90s and you get into things like Get Off, you're in a bit of a different world of Prince there.
I mean, I like
Um,
that stuff because I remember that
yeah.
stuff. I like Get Off.
Yeah.
I like Diamonds and Pearls,
Yeah.
Most Beautiful Girl in the World. All
Yeah.
that stuff I think is
Yeah.
smashing.
Yeah. Oh, don't get me wrong. They're all brilliant. But
Mm.
his early works, if you're going to start with them, you start with those early works and then you build
Yeah.
the other stuff. He's got some amazing stuff out there. And as you said earlier, you know, Bill Oddie saying, go for the 3rd album on the box set. I would really leave that until you've listened to everything else because
Yeah.
there's so many just good songs out there that you could listen to quite happily. You know, just pick up on the compilations, to be honest, and listen to his greatest hits. And you'll get a really good idea of who he is as an artist.
Mm.
And then you can go back over album tracks and go, yeah, you know, these are the good album tracks. Let's have a listen to these ones as well. One of his best album tracks that nobody ever has heard of is Starfish and Coffee.
I'm going to surprise you. I know
Oh.
Starfish in Coffee because it was covered by Soul Wax once.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a good song.
It's just a bizarre little song about some girl that brings Starfish and Coffee in for a lunch.
Yeah,
It's a fantastic break in the middle of Sign of the Times because it comes after, I think it might actually be after a couple of depressing tracks on there.
yeah,
So it just lifts everything for a second, which he does really well. He'll go from slow, depressing almost music to absolute banging house tune that just makes you go,
Mhm.
yeah, okay, I'm with that now.
yeah.
Yeah. Or he'll do it in the same song. I mean, take Beautiful Ones, as you mentioned before. It's a lovely song, but then to end it the way he does with the shouting and screaming and the wonderful guitar riffs and stuff,
Yes.
it's just amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, I banged on again there.
That's good though. That's what I want. I mean, there's got to be if you feel guilty about it, we'll do a payback episode where I drone on about an artist I love that you're not into. Send me suggestions and I'll make you sit through it.
Right, okay, I'll have to have a look now. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I was going to mention about it. I think I was going to mention about the ill treatment of women through the film, because I think there is a strong thing in it. And I said earlier about Morris Day and the Time being the kind of the comedy sidekicks almost, and Jerome and Morris being very, very funny in places. But there's a point in it that I just have to mention because it's so bad, and it's the thing that makes this film one that you probably should stay away from a certain point in this day and age, where a woman comes up to Morris Day and basically tells him off for the fact that she stood him up. And he just mentions Jerome Gedder, and they drag her off down an alley, physically lift her up and throw her into a trash can. Worse than that, they then lock her in the trash can and then walk away as if it's all right. And it's the most bizarre thing. And I can see that it's got a kind of comic bit to it that, you know, they've just picked her up and chucked her in a bin. But they lock her in there. And that makes it no longer funny and no longer all right.
It is fucking weird, that bit, isn't it? Yeah. I didn't mention it because I assumed there must be something I've missed there. Did we see that character earlier? No.
No,
Okay. Yeah.
no.
And I think that
It's
sort of it colors things like that sort of color the viewpoints of people when they come to the other things in the film. People don't really appreciate that Prince is that the kid's big sort of moment of redemption is when he credits Wendy and Lisa because
yes,
you've got this sour taste still in your mouth.
yeah. And I mean, obviously we see his father hitting his mother. You see Prince hit Apollonia. It's all there,
Mm.
and that's blatant. But this one's just kind of it's in the background, and they don't really dwell on it at all. It's almost like the director and writer thought this will be funny.
Yeah, yeah.
But then it is funny to a point until until they lock her in there. Because if they just left it with her open, chucked her in there and they go, it's like, oh, it's a bit funny. And they could even cut back to her and she's climbing back out. It would then be amusing. Still not right, but it'd be amusing at least.
You could appreciate that as a joke, as something that was like light in tone. Yeah, locking her in is weirdly
lock her in there.
sadistic. Yeah.
She's still there now. She's never gone back to him. Yeah, but I think Morris Day and the Times story arc in this is just completely lost. There doesn't seem to be a need for that part of the story, and I think it's a shame that they weren't used more.
Maybe that was some of the cut material where, like at the end, he would learn that it's bad to lock a woman in a bin. Maybe that was it.
They go and open it up and go, come on, it's okay.
Yeah, we're having a party here, mate.
Yeah, come and do the bird. Yeah. Anyway, I just felt that needed to be one thing that was mentioned because I think yes, it so strange and so of its time. Because I think in the 80s, it was probably fine.
Yeah,
and it was acceptable to a certain extent, but it's not now. And we need to be aware these things are no longer acceptable, and we do not condone them in any way, shape, or form.
Listeners, if there's one lesson that you want to take home from this episode, it's that you should not lock women in bins.
Absolutely. Yeah. Never lock a woman in a bin.
Well, if you enjoyed what you're listening to and you want more moral instruction, you can get an exclusive episode every month on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show. We are gearing up to release our next Patreon exclusive early next month. Stay tuned to find out what that's all about. You can stay informed by tuning into our social networks. It's late, listeners. I've turned into your granddad. You can subscribe to our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook feed. We're on all of them at TGS_The Geek Show. But until next week, that's been your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
And I've been Gav.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.